The baseball bat connected with the reinforced steel core, sending a bone-jarring vibration up Karen's arms. As she stumbled backward, clutching her wrists in agony, the mailbox stood unmarked, a silent sentinel that had finally turned the tables. What started as cruel neighborhood bullying was about to become something far more dangerous. Sometimes, when you push a quiet man too far, the ground beneath your feet shifts. In David Chen had always believed in keeping his head down and his problems to himself. At 34, he'd perfected the art of invisibility, the kind that came from years of being the only Asian family on Maple Street, the kind that meant choosing battles carefully and losing most of them quietly. The first time the Hartwell sisters hit his mailbox, David had been in his kitchen making coffee. The metallic clang followed by raucous laughter had sent him to the window, where he watched Karen and Linda Hartwell, both in their early 40s with the entitled swagger of women who'd never faced real consequences, speed away in Karen's red pickup truck. His mailbox, a simple black metal post his deceased father had installed 15 years ago, lay crumpled on the frosty November ground like a wounded animal. Teenagers, his wife Susan had said, not looking up from her laptop. Just replace it and move on. But David had seen the women's faces clearly. The Hartwell sisters lived 3 houses down in the sprawling colonial with the immaculate lawn and the blessed doormat. They weren't teenagers. They were grown women who'd apparently decided his mailbox made an excellent target for their late-night entertainment. He'd replaced the mailbox the next day. A simple black post, identical to the first. The mail carrier, Mrs. Rodriguez, had given him a sympathetic look as she'd filled it with bills and circulars. "Second time this month I've seen mailboxes down on this street," she'd said, shaking her head. "Some people got no respect." David had nodded, said nothing, and gone back inside to his quiet life. The second attack came a week later. This time, David was in his home office, grading papers for his high school physics classes, when he heard the familiar sound of an engine slowing down outside. He'd moved to the window just in time to see Karen Hartwell lean out of her truck's passenger window, baseball bat in hand, as her sister Linda drove slowly past. Crack. The new mailbox folded like origami. This time, the sisters didn't just laugh and drive away. They stopped the truck and got out, their voices carrying clearly in the crisp night air. "God, did you see that thing just crumple?" Karen's voice was thick with alcohol and amusement. Like it was made of tin foil. "We should make this a regular thing," Linda replied, her laugh sharp and mean. "Little Chen probably thinks we're doing him a favor, giving him something to do with his weekend." David's hands had tightened on the windowsill. Little Chen. The casual racism rolled off their tongues like it was nothing, just another joke between sisters who'd probably been making jokes at other people's expense their entire lives. "You know what's funny?" Karen continued, swaying slightly as she examined the destroyed mailbox. "He'll just put up another one. They always do. Never fight back, never complain. Just clean up the mess and pretend nothing happened. That's what makes it so perfect," Linda said, getting back into the driver's seat. "Zero consequences. Zero drama. Just pure, simple fun." As they drove away, David had stood in his window for a long time, watching the scattered pieces of his mailbox. In the pale street light behind him, Susan was closing her laptop, getting ready for bed, completely unaware that their quiet life had just shifted into something else entirely. The third mailbox lasted 5 days. David had been walking his elderly neighbor Mr. Peterson's dog when he'd heard the familiar sound of the pickup truck. This time, he'd been close enough to see everything clearly, Karen's face twisted with anticipation, the practiced swing of the bat, the way both sisters erupted into laughter as another mailbox met its fate. "Those your mailboxes they keep hitting?" Mr. Peterson had asked, his voice gravelly with age and cigarettes. "Yeah," David had replied, watching the truck disappear around the corner. "You know who's doing it?" David had nodded slowly. "The Hartwell sisters. From the Colonial." Mr. Peterson had made a sound somewhere between a snort and a laugh. "Those two. Should have known. Their daddy was the same way back in the day. Thought the whole neighborhood belonged to him." He'd studied David's face. "You planning to do something about it?" "Like what?" "File a police report." That's destruction of property. Probably costs you $50 each time to replace. David had considered this. The idea of calling the police, of making his problem everyone else's problem, felt foreign and complicated. I don't know. Seems like a lot of trouble for a mailbox. Trouble's already found you, son. Question is what you're gonna do about it. That night, David had lain awake thinking about trouble. About the way Karen Hartwell had said Little Chen like it was his actual name. About the casual cruelty in Linda's laugh. About the assumption that he would just keep taking it, keep cleaning up, keep pretending. At 2 a.m., he'd gotten up and gone to his computer. Not to grade papers, but to research mailbox construction. Federal regulations. Materials. Engineering principles that might apply to a simple metal post designed to hold letters. By dawn, he had pages of notes and a plan that made his pulse quicken with something he hadn't felt in years, the anticipation of fighting back. The new mailbox went up on a Saturday. To anyone walking past, it looked identical to the previous 3, black metal, simple design, nothing remarkable. But David knew better. He'd spent the week in his garage, working with materials he'd driven 3 towns over to purchase from a supplier who didn't ask questions. The base was concrete, reinforced with rebar and sunk 3 feet deep. The post itself was hollow steel, but filled with concrete and steel rods. The mailbox portion looked standard but was backed by a steel plate that could stop a sledgehammer. It was a work of art disguised as suburban mediocrity. On Monday, Mrs. Rodriguez had complimented him on how solid the new mailbox looked. Built to last, she'd said approvingly. That's the idea, David had replied. For a week, nothing happened. David began to wonder if maybe the Hartwell sisters had moved on to other targets, other sources of entertainment. He caught himself checking the window at night, listening for the sound of their truck, and realized he was almost disappointed by the quiet. Then, on a Thursday night in early December, he heard it, the low rumble of an engine, moving slowly down Maple Street. David moved to his window and watched Karen Hartwell's red pickup approach. Both sisters were in the truck, and even from a distance, he could see they'd been drinking. The truck wove slightly as it approached his house, and when it stopped, Karen had to steady herself against the door frame as she climbed out. 4 times the charm, she announced loudly, hefting her aluminum baseball bat. Batter up, Little Chen. Linda kept the engine running, giggling as her sister approached the mailbox. Make it count, Karen. I want to see pieces fly. David held his breath as Karen took her stance. Everything depended on the next few seconds, months of planning, research, and careful construction all condensed into the moment when aluminum met steel. Karen swung with all her might, putting her full weight behind the blow. The bat connected with the mailbox with a sound like a bell tolling. But instead of the satisfying crunch of destroyed metal, there was only that deep, resonant clang, followed immediately by Karen's scream of pain. The vibration had traveled up the bat and into her arms with the force of a freight train. She dropped the bat and stumbled backward, clutching her wrists, her face contorted in shock and agony. What the hell? Linda shouted, jumping out of the truck. The mailbox stood unmarked, unmoved, perfect in its quiet victory. Karen was on her knees now, cradling her arms. Something's wrong with it, she gasped. It's not supposed to do that. David watched from his window as Linda examined the mailbox, running her hands over its surface. Even from a distance, he could see the confusion on her face as she realized what she was looking at wasn't what it appeared to be. It's fake, Linda said finally. It's got to be fake. No mailbox is that solid. My wrists, Karen moaned. I think something's broken. As Linda helped her sister to the truck, David felt something shift inside him. For the first time in his adult life, he'd fought back. And won. But as he watched the red pickup disappear into the night, Karen still clutching her injured arms, David realized that this wasn't the end of anything. It was just the beginning. End of part 1. The emergency room visit had cost Karen Hartwell 3 hours and $400 in copays. The x-rays showed hairline fractures in both wrists, not serious enough for casts, but painful enough to require splints and a prescription for painkillers that made her head fuzzy and her temper shorter. How exactly did this happen again? Dr. Martinez had asked, examining the symmetrical nature of the injuries. I fell, Karen had lied, shooting a warning look at Linda. Slipped on some ice. But lies had a way of festering, especially when they involved humiliation. By the time Karen got home, her story had evolved. By morning, it had become something else entirely. He booby-trapped it, she told Linda over coffee, her splintered hands making even simple tasks frustrating. That mailbox was designed to hurt someone. That's assault, Linda. Maybe even attempted murder. Linda stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Unlike her sister, Linda Hartwell had always been the planner, the one who thought 3 moves ahead. At 42, she'd survived a bitter divorce and a custody battle that had taught her the value of documentation, patience, and strategic thinking. We need to be smart about this, she said. If we go to the police now, we're admitting we were vandalizing his property. That's a crime too. So what, we just let him get away with it? I didn't say that. Linda's smile was thin and calculating. I said we need to be smart. Linda's first move was research. She spent the morning on her laptop, diving into municipal codes and homeowner association regulations. By lunch, she had a thick folder of printed documents and a plan that made Karen's eyes light up despite the pain medication. There are rules, Linda explained, spreading the papers across her kitchen table. Mailbox specifications, setback requirements, materials restrictions. Look at this. She pointed to a highlighted section of the municipal code. Mailboxes must be constructed of materials and in a manner that will not present a hazard to vehicles or pedestrians. They can't be reinforced beyond standard specifications without permits. Karen leaned forward, wincing as she moved her splintered wrists. You think he didn't get permits? I'm sure he didn't. And look at this. Linda flipped to another page. The Postal Service has specific requirements for mailbox construction. They have to be designed to break away if hit by a vehicle. It's a safety regulation. So what he did was illegal. Better than illegal. It was a violation of about 6 different codes and regulations. Linda's smile widened. We are going to bury him in paperwork. The first complaint was filed Monday morning. Linda drove to City Hall with a folder full of documentation, photos of the mailbox, and a carefully crafted story about neighborhood safety concerns. I'm worried about the children, she told the code enforcement officer, a tired-looking woman named Patricia Webb. This mailbox is like a concrete barrier. If a kid on a bike hit it, they could be seriously injured. Webb examined the photos with the weary expression of someone who'd seen every possible neighborhood dispute. Has anyone actually been hurt? Not yet, Linda said carefully. But it's only a matter of time. The whole thing is clearly not up to code. I'll send someone out to take a look, Webb said, making a note in her file. If there are violations, we'll issue a citation. Linda's second stop was the Homeowner Association office. Maple Street fell under the jurisdiction of the Willowbrook HOA, and Linda had served on the board for 3 years. She knew exactly which buttons to push. David Chen's mailbox is an eyesore, she told HOA President Margaret Kowalski. It's massive, industrial-looking, and completely out of character with the neighborhood aesthetic. Margaret, a retired teacher who took her HOA duty seriously, frowned as she reviewed the photos. It does look rather fortress-like. Do we have architectural guidelines for mailboxes? We have guidelines for any external modifications, Linda replied smoothly. All changes to front yard structures require board approval. I don't recall Mr. Chen submitting any requests. I'll add it to the agenda for next week's meeting. The third complaint went to the Postal Service. Linda had discovered that mailboxes had to meet specific USPS requirements, and she was betting David's reinforced fortress didn't qualify. By Tuesday afternoon, Linda had filed complaints with 4 different agencies. By Wednesday, the first inspector arrived. David was grading papers when he heard the knock on his door. The woman on his porch wore a city uniform and carried a clipboard with the grim efficiency of bureaucracy. Mr. Chen. I'm Patricia Webb from Code Enforcement. I'm here about your mailbox. David's stomach dropped. What about it? We've received a complaint that it may not be up to code. Mind if I take a look? They walked to the mailbox together, were taking photos and measurements while David watched with growing dread. The mailbox that had felt like a victory on Thursday night now seemed like a monument to his own stupidity. Well, Webb said finally, I can see why someone might be concerned. This thing is built like a bunker. Do you have permits for this construction? I didn't know I needed permits for a mailbox. For a standard mailbox, you don't. But this. She tapped the post with her knuckle, noting the solid sound. This is a custom structure. Probably requires a building permit, maybe an engineering review. She made notes on her clipboard. You'll need to submit documentation showing this meets all safety and structural requirements, or you'll need to replace it with a standard mailbox. How long do I have? 30 days. After that, we can fine you $50 a day until it's brought into compliance. After Webb left, David sat in his kitchen staring at the stack of papers she'd left him. The forms were dense with legal language and technical requirements that might as well have been written in a foreign language. The words structural engineer, impact analysis, and environmental review jumped out at him like warnings. Susan found him there an hour later, still staring at the papers. What's all this? She asked, setting down her purse. The city wants documentation that the mailbox meets safety codes, David said. They want engineering reports, impact studies, permit applications. It's going to cost thousands of dollars. Susan picked up the papers, scanning them quickly. This is ridiculous. It's a mailbox, not a skyscraper. Tell that to the code enforcement officer. Who complained? David looked up at her, and Susan saw something in his expression that made her step back. Who do you think? The HOA letter arrived Thursday. The Postal Service inspection was scheduled for Friday. By Saturday, David had received notices from 4 different agencies, each requiring different forms of documentation, each with different deadlines, each carrying the threat of fines and legal action. Linda Hartwell had turned his moment of victory into a bureaucratic nightmare. You have to fight this, Susan said, reviewing the latest batch of letters. This is harassment. Can't you see that? Of course I can see it, David snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. I'm sorry. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. By doing what? Letting them destroy your property. By keeping my head down. By not making waves. David rubbed his temples. Now look what happened. They've turned the whole neighborhood against me. The neighborhood? David, this is just the Hartwell sisters. Everyone else probably thinks you're the victim here. But David wasn't so sure. He'd seen the way Mrs. Patterson from across the street had looked at him when the code enforcement officer was taking measurements. He'd noticed Mr. Jenkins slowing down during his evening walk, staring at the mailbox with obvious curiosity. The quiet life he'd built for himself was crumbling, and he had no idea how to stop it. Sunday morning brought the first act of direct retaliation. David discovered it when he went out to get the newspaper. Someone had spray-painted "Paranoid Freak" across his garage door in red letters. The paint was still wet. David stood in his driveway, staring at the words, feeling something cold and hard settle in his chest. This wasn't about a mailbox anymore. This was about power, about who got to decide what happened in their small corner of the world. He looked up and down the street. Most of his neighbors were probably still sleeping, but he could see a light on in the Hartwell house. Could see movement behind the curtains. Linda Hartwell was awake, and David was willing to bet she was watching. He walked to his garage and opened the door. Inside, among his tools and gardening supplies, sat a pressure washer he'd bought but never used. He'd planned to clean his deck with it, maybe his driveway. Instead, he wheeled it outside and began setting it up. The noise of the motor echoed through the quiet Sunday morning, and David saw more lights coming on in neighboring houses. People were waking up, looking out their windows, witnessing his humiliation. The pressure washer made quick work of the spray paint, but David didn't stop there. He methodically cleaned the entire garage door, then moved onto his driveway, then his sidewalk. The noise was therapeutic, drowning out the thoughts that had been circling in his head for days. When he finished, his garage door was spotless. His driveway looked better than it had in years. And Linda Hartwell was standing in her front yard. Watching him with her expression of pure calculation, David looked directly at her across the 3 houses that separated them. Even from that distance, he could see her smile. She wasn't done with him. Not even close. But as David coiled up the pressure washer hose, he realized something that surprised him. He wasn't done with her either. The HOA meeting was held in the community center basement, a sterile room with fluorescent lighting and the faint smell of industrial carpet cleaner. David arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a folder of documents and a knot of anxiety in his stomach that had been growing for days. Margaret Kowalski called the meeting to order at 7 sharp, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years managing high school students. Tonight we are addressing the mailbox situation on Maple Street. Mr. Chen, you are here to respond to the complaint. David stood, feeling the weight of 24 pairs of eyes. Most of the faces were familiar, neighbors he'd waved to for years. People whose names he knew but had never really spoken to. In the back row, Linda Hartwell sat with her arms crossed, her expression neutral. Karen was absent, probably nursing her injured wrists. I built a mailbox, David said, his voice steadier than he felt. A sturdy one. I didn't know I needed permission. The issue, Margaret continued, consulting her notes, is that your mailbox appears to be significantly reinforced beyond standard specifications. The board is concerned about neighborhood aesthetics and safety. Safety? David couldn't keep the edge out of his voice. The only safety issue is people destroying other people's property. A murmur ran through the room. Linda Hartwell leaned forward slightly, and David caught the faint smile on her lips. Mr. Chen, Margaret said carefully, we are not here to discuss vandalism. We are here to discuss HOA compliance. How can you discuss one without the other? David looked around the room. I reinforced my mailbox because someone kept destroying it. 3 times in 2 months. That's unfortunate, said Bob Martinez, the board treasurer, but you can't just build whatever you want because you are having problems with vandals. So what's the solution? David asked. I just keep replacing it every week. You could install a security camera, suggested Mrs. Patterson. Catch whoever's doing it. Or, Linda Hartwell said, speaking for the first time, you could build a mailbox that meets community standards and work with the police to address the vandalism properly. The room fell silent. Linda's reasonable tone and measured words made David's frustration sound petulant by comparison. Mrs. Hartwell, Margaret said, do you have specific concerns about the mailbox structure? I do. Linda stood, pulling out her own folder. I've done some research on mailbox safety regulations. According to USPS guidelines, mailboxes must be designed to break away if struck by a vehicle. Mr. Chen's mailbox appears to be designed to do the opposite. She handed Margaret a printed page. If a car hit that mailbox, it could cause serious injury or death. The post is essentially a concrete pillar disguised as a mailbox. David felt heat rising in his cheeks. Nobody's going to hit it with a car. It's set back from the street just like every other mailbox. Accidents happen, Linda replied smoothly. Teenage drivers, elderly drivers, people dealing with medical emergencies. The regulations exist for a reason. What about the accidents? That happen when people attack mailboxes with baseball bats. David shot back. The room erupted in whispers. Margaret banged her gavel. That's enough. Mr. Chen, do you have evidence of vandalism? I saw it happen. 3 times. Did you report it to the police? David hesitated. No. Did you file insurance claims? No. So you have no documentation of these alleged incidents. The trap was springing shut, and David could feel it. I have the destroyed mailboxes. I kept the pieces. That's not evidence of who destroyed them, Bob Martinez pointed out. Could have been a snowplow, a delivery truck, kids playing around. I know what I saw. What you think you saw, Linda corrected gently. In the dark, from your window, possibly weeks apart. Memory can be unreliable. David stared at her, understanding finally the depth of her strategy. She wasn't just attacking his mailbox, she was attacking his credibility, his character, his right to defend himself. The board's position, Margaret announced, is that Mr. Chen must bring his mailbox into compliance with community standards within 30 days, or face fines of $50 per day. And if someone destroys the replacement? David asked. Then you'll have to replace it again, and hopefully work with proper authorities to address the vandalism. David looked around the room one more time. These people weren't evil. They were just tired, busy, and looking for the simplest solution to a problem they didn't want to deal with. Linda Hartwell had given them that solution: make it David's problem. I understand, he said finally. But as he walked out of the community center, David was already planning his next move. The hardware store trip the next morning was educational. David had never realized how many different types of mailboxes existed, how many ways there were to mount them, how many creative solutions people had developed for the simple problem of receiving mail. Looking for something vandal-proof? Asked Jerry, the store manager, when David explained his situation. Something like that. Jerry led him to a display of high-end mailboxes. These are popular with folks who've had problems. Locking mechanisms, reinforced construction, but still meets all the postal regulations. David examined the options. They were expensive, some cost more than $300, but they were also sophisticated. Hidden hinges, tamper-proof. Locks, impact-resistant materials that looked standard but weren't. This one's interesting, Jerry said, pointing to a sleek black model. Looks like a regular mailbox, but the whole thing is spring-loaded. If someone hits it, it absorbs the impact and bounces back. Won't hurt the attacker, but won't break either. What about this one? David pointed to a model that looked identical to his original mailbox. That's the Fortress series. Magnetic mounting system. If someone hits it hard enough, the whole mailbox detaches and falls over, but the post stays intact. You just pop it back on. David studied the mechanism. It was elegant in its simplicity. The mailbox would appear to be destroyed, but would actually be completely unharmed. I'll take it, he said. The installation took most of Saturday. David worked methodically, following the instructions precisely. To anyone watching, he was simply replacing his controversial mailbox with a standard model. The magnetic mounting system was invisible, the spring-loaded mechanism hidden within the post. When he finished, the mailbox looked exactly like the one the Hartwell sisters had destroyed 4 times. But David knew better. Sunday evening brought the test he'd been expecting. David was in his living room, reading, when he heard the familiar sound of the pickup truck. He moved to the window and watched Karen Hartwell climb out, her wrists apparently healed enough for another round of destruction. 5th time's the charm, she called to Linda, hefting a new aluminum bat. Make it count, Linda replied from the driver's seat. Karen approached the mailbox with confidence, winding up for a devastating blow. The bat connected with a solid thwack that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. The mailbox flew off its post and crashed to the ground with a satisfying clatter of metal on asphalt. Yes, Karen shouted, pumping her fist in the air. Back to normal. The sisters high-fived through the truck window, laughing as they drove away, leaving the mailbox scattered in pieces across David's driveway. David waited 5 minutes, then walked outside in his bathrobe and slippers. To anyone watching, he was just a defeated man cleaning up the latest mess. He gathered the pieces of the mailbox, shaking his head in apparent frustration. Back in his garage, he examined the components. The magnetic mounting system had worked perfectly. The mailbox had detached exactly as designed, and the spring-loaded mechanism had absorbed the impact without damage. A few scratches on the surface, but nothing that wouldn't buff out. It took him 3 minutes to snap the mailbox back onto its post. By Monday morning, David's mailbox stood pristine and undamaged, ready for another day of mail delivery. Mrs. Rodriguez, the mail carrier, paused when she saw it. "Didn't I see this thing in pieces yesterday?" she asked. "Must have been a different mailbox," David replied innocently. 3 houses down, Linda Hartwell was standing in her kitchen window, staring at David's mailbox with an expression of pure confusion. David caught her eye and waved cheerfully. The war was far from over, but for the first time since this whole thing started, David felt like he was winning. That feeling lasted exactly 12 hours. The police car pulled into his driveway Tuesday morning just as David was leaving for work. Officer Martinez, no relation to the HOA treasurer, climbed out with the weary expression of a man who'd spent too many years dealing with neighborhood disputes. "Mr. Chen, I need to ask you some questions about your mailbox." David's stomach dropped. "What about it?" "We've received a complaint that you may be booby-trapping your mailbox." "That's a serious offense, potentially a felony." "Booby-trapping?" Officer Martinez consulted his notepad. "According to the complaint, your mailbox is designed to cause injury to anyone who tries to tamper with it. Someone was hurt trying to move it." David looked past the officer to the Hartwell house. Linda was visible in her front window, watching the scene unfold. "I just have a regular mailbox," David said carefully. "Mind if I take a look?" They walked to the mailbox together. Officer Martinez examined it from every angle, tapping the post, testing the mounting mechanism. "Seems pretty standard," he said finally. "Though." The security camera arrived Wednesday morning, delivered in a plain brown box that David signed for with hands that shook slightly. He'd ordered it online at 3 a.m., after lying awake for hours thinking about Officer Martinez's warning and Linda Hartwell's cold stare. The camera was small, weatherproof, and designed to look like a motion sensor light. David spent the afternoon installing it under the eaves of his garage, angled to capture anyone approaching his mailbox. The wireless signal connected to his home network, and within hours he was watching a live feed on his phone. "This is smart," Susan said, reviewing the camera's features. "Now if anything happens, you'll have proof." "If anything happens," David repeated, but they both knew it was a matter of when, not if. The first test came Thursday night. David was grading papers when his phone buzzed with a motion alert. He opened the app and watched Karen Hartwell's pickup truck pull up to his mailbox. Both sisters got out, but this time they didn't have a bat. Instead, Linda carried a small bag and what looked like a spray bottle. David watched in real time as Linda approached his mailbox while Karen kept watch. She sprayed something on the mailbox. The camera's night vision showed a dark liquid covering the surface, then opened her bag and pulled out what looked like raw meat. She began stuffing the meat into the mailbox's mail slot, cramming piece after piece through the narrow opening. When she finished, she sprayed the mailbox again, then both sisters retreated to their truck. "What the hell?" David muttered, rewinding the footage. The liquid was obviously some kind of scent attractant. The meat was bait. Linda was trying to lure animals to his mailbox, probably hoping they'd damage it naturally or create a health hazard that would force him to remove it. David waited until Friday morning to check the mailbox. The smell hit him from 10 feet away, rotting meat mixed with something that smelled like fish oil and urine. Inside the mailbox, decomposing hamburger and what looked like chicken livers had created a soup of putrefaction. Mrs. Rodriguez took one look at the mess and shook her head. "Can't deliver mail to that, Mr. Chen. You'll need to clean it out." "I understand." It took an hour with rubber gloves, bleach, and a garden hose to clean the mailbox. The stench lingered, and David was sure the neighbors could smell it from their houses. By noon, he'd received texts from 3 different people asking if everything was okay. The camera had captured it all in perfect high-definition detail. David spent Friday evening editing the footage, creating a clean compilation that showed the sisters' faces clearly, their license plate, and every detail of what they'd done. He uploaded it to his computer, backed it up to the cloud, and prepared copies for the police. Saturday morning, he drove to the police station. Officer Martinez reviewed the footage with the tired expression of a man who'd seen too much human stupidity. "Well, that's definitely vandalism and destruction of property. Probably a health code violation too. So you can arrest them." "I can cite them. But Mr. Chen, you should know that filing charges is going to escalate this situation significantly." Are you prepared for that? David thought about Linda's cold stare, about the way she'd systematically tried to destroy his life over a mailbox. Yes. All right. I'll need you to sign a complaint and we'll issue citations. They'll have to appear in court. What about the footage? That's excellent evidence. Make sure you keep those files safe. The citations were served Sunday afternoon. David watched from his window as 2 patrol cars pulled up to the Hartwell house. Karen answered the door in her bathrobe, and David could see her face change as the officers explained why they were there. Linda appeared a few minutes later, still in her church clothes. Even from a distance, David could see the fury in her posture as she accepted the citation. Both sisters looked directly at David's house as the police cars pulled away. The message was clear: this was no longer a game. Monday brought the counterattack. David's principal, Dr. Sarah Henderson, called him into her office during his lunch break. She was a fair but no-nonsense administrator who'd always supported David's teaching, which made her serious expression all the more concerning. David, I need to ask you about some complaints we've received. What kind of complaints? Parents are saying you've been acting strangely lately. Distracted, paranoid, possibly unstable. One parent mentioned something about you being involved in a police matter. David's stomach dropped. Who complained? I can't tell you that, but I need to know if there's something going on that might affect your teaching. There's a neighbor dispute. Nothing that affects my work. A neighbor dispute that involves the police. David explained the situation carefully, leaving out the details about the reinforced mailbox and focusing on the vandalism and his attempts to document it. Dr. Henderson listened without interrupting. So you're saying these women have been targeting you for months? Yes. And you have video evidence? Yes. David, I'm going to be straight with you. This sounds like a serious situation, and I'm concerned about your safety and well-being. I'm also concerned about how this might affect your students. It won't affect my students. It already has. Your chemistry class last week, 3 students came to me saying you seemed off. You were jumpier than usual, kept looking out the window, didn't seem focused on the lesson. David realized she was right. He'd been checking his phone constantly, monitoring the camera feed, watching for the next attack. It was affecting everything. I can handle this, he said. I'm sure you can. But I'm putting you on administrative leave until this situation is resolved. What? It's temporary. With pay. Just until you can get this sorted out. Dr. Henderson, please. Teaching is the only normal thing in my life right now. I'm sorry, David. My hands are tied. There are liability issues if something happens during school hours. David left the school in a daze. In less than a week, he'd gone from having video evidence of his tormentors to being suspended from his job. Somehow, Linda Hartwell had turned his victory into another defeat. At home, Susan was waiting with her own bad news. The HOA sent a letter, she said, handing him an official-looking envelope. They are filing a lawsuit. David read the letter twice before the words sank in. The Homeowner Association was suing him for creating a public nuisance, violating community standards, and engaging in a pattern of behavior detrimental to neighborhood harmony. They are claiming the mailbox dispute has lowered property values. Susan continued. They want damages and an injunction forcing us to move. They can't do that. They can try. And legal fees alone could bankrupt us. David sat down heavily. How did this happen? I just wanted to stop people from destroying my mailbox. Oh no. Susan sat beside him. But maybe it's time to think about just giving up. Replace the mailbox with something standard, apologize. To the neighbors, try to move on. You want me to surrender? I want you to be practical. Look what this has cost us already. Your job, thousands in legal fees, the stress. Is a mailbox really worth all this? David looked out the window at his mailbox, standing innocent and unremarkable in the afternoon sun. It wasn't about the mailbox anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It's not about the mailbox, he said quietly. It's about the fact that some people think they can do whatever they want to whoever they want, and the rest of us just have to take it. So what's your plan? Fight them in court? Spend our savings on lawyers? Risk everything? David didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about Linda Hartwell's systematic campaign, about the way she'd turned his neighbors against him, cost him his job, and now threatened his home. About the casual cruelty in her laugh that first night, the way she'd said Little Chen like it was his actual name. I don't know, he said finally. But I'm not giving up. That night, David sat in his garage, staring at the tools and materials he'd accumulated over the past few months. The pressure washer that had cleaned his garage door. The concrete mixer he'd used for the original mailbox. The various electronic components from his security system. On his phone, he had hours of footage showing the Hartwell sisters' escalating attacks. In his computer, he had documentation of every citation, every complaint, every legal maneuver they'd used against him. He also had something else, a growing understanding of how Linda Hartwell thought, how she operated, what she feared. David opened his laptop and began to research. Not mailboxes this time, but something else entirely. Something that would end this war once and for all. By dawn, he had a plan that made his pulse quicken with anticipation and terror in equal measure. The quiet man who just wanted to protect his mailbox was about to become something else entirely. End of part 4.